Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we continue with our exploration of Asian horror, good and bad, from 2004. Now in our last video we covered the worst films from this particular year, in my opinion, but then in this video we are going to cover some titles that I found underwhelming, as well as some titles that I found to be interesting and worth a watch. But first, we have some honorable mentions to get through. And remember, these are movies that some people classify as horror films that I do not. Now, the one I loved the most from this honorable mention list is Vital, which I reviewed in a separate video on my YouTube channel, so be sure to check that video out if you're interested in that. It's kind of a dark romance film, really. I moderately enjoyed a film called Sodom the Killer, which is a hilarious low-budget film, and The Man Behind the Scissors, which is a pretty good slow-burn thriller. Roger Swan actually reviewed both of his films on his channel years ago, so you can check out his reviews if you want some more information on those. And I also enjoyed a film called Kibakichi, which is a werewolf swordsman movie. Yes, so if you're interested in a werewolf swordsman movie, check out Kibakichi. The second film isn't quite as good as the first one. There's actually 2 films in that series. And I also enjoyed Flower and Snake, which is a kind of a remake of a film from the 70s. It's basically a sultry exploitation flick, so if you want something a little naughty, that one's pretty good. Some of the ones I did not like, though, are Shaolin vs. Evil Dead, Sexual Parasite, and Kill Devil. Now, a quick word on Kill Devil, because it's definitely worthy of a mention here, is that it is an action thriller hybrid, and that's good in this case because if it were a horror film, it could have defeated Marinette as the worst Asian horror film from 2004. It's terrible. And a brief way to describe it is this, okay? If you ever wondered just how badly the concept of Battle Royale could have been screwed up and butchered, go ahead and check out Kill Devil, because it's amongst the absolute worst Japanese films I've ever seen. Just, that movie's bad. But we're moving on here. We're moving on, because we have some horror films to discuss. Just for my honorable mentions, though, you can probably tell that 2004 was kind of a crazy year, and that's good for us, because that makes for some interesting discussion. So let's get started here. And remember, titles for all of the movies I discuss are listed in the description box below. Now, our first film tonight is a film called Bunshinsaba from South Korea. Now, 3 girls decide to call the spirit of the dead to kill their school bullies, but afterward they must deal with the consequences. Now, the main character here is called Yoo-jin. She's a transfer student from Seoul, and along with her 2 best friends, she is constantly being bullied by a group of their classmates. One night, Yoo-jin and her friends decide to place a curse on their enemies by creating a Ouija board on which they write the names of the female bullies. Now, using the Bunshinsaba curse, her friend warns the others not to open their eyes until the spell is finished. But this is the horror film, and when the calling takes effect, Yoo-jin, somewhat curious of this, opens her eyes. To her shock and horror, she sees an image of, what else? A pale-like dead girl with long hair beside her. So, are you rolling your eyes yet? Because if you haven't guessed, this movie is hampered by too many cliches. The most obvious of which is the Onryo ghost, which, is a ghost girl with long black hair, of course, who makes a ton of appearances in this one, and gives the same exact stare every single time. So the horror elements and the scare tactics here are very repetitive, and not in a good way. Now, this is one of those instances where a cliche can really hurt a movie. Not only because it's used so much here, but because everything else around it lacks the quality to make up for that flaw. Yeah, the direction and the acting are pretty good overall, but it's not good enough in this case. This was directed by a man by the name of Byung-ki-an, who previously gave us Phone from 2002, which I personally love. So he experienced a disappointing fall in terms of quality with this Bunshinsaba film. And overall, this director's career has not been too impressive in my opinion, and it appears that Phone was his one shining moment. But I think we'll cover a few of his other movies a little bit later on here. So Bunshinsaba, I don't really recommend that one. Not too good. The next film here, we move to the Philippines for Spirit of the Glass. Now, at her family's remote ancestral home, a young woman, her boyfriend, and a group of friends fight boredom by dabbling in the supernatural game called Spirit of the Glass. Now, we just covered a movie involving a Ouija board, and from what I remember, the Spirit of the Glass is very similar, because you have a board or some type of cloth that is basically the gaming apparatus, and then you take a glass that multiple people touch and move while performing a chant of some kind, I believe. Now, this movie is a slow-paced endeavor that does not compensate with style, such as great visuals, set designs, etc. There's nothing really memorable there, or interesting storylines. There's nothing really interesting or engaging in the storyline, which is fairly commonplace here. It's just very drawn out and dull. Despite its consistently dark mood, which is a positive, the horror sequences themselves fall flat, and the conclusion itself is sleep-inducing. It doesn't finish strong, this movie, at all. The actresses are fairly good and very attractive for the guys out there, but they also do get a bit annoying at times. This one, Spirit of the Glass, does not cut it. Does not cut it, so I do not recommend it. Now, our next film is a bit different from the last two that we covered, and it does have some fanfare, and I can definitely see why, but just doesn't work for me overall. And I rewatched it recently, so I'm quite sure of my opinion on this one. And there's a lot to say about it, because it's a bit different. And that is Sars Wars, a Thai horror comedy. Actually, I would say that this film is actually slightly more of a comedy than it is a horror film. Now, a group of people must fight zombies in an apartment complex in this ultra-silly comedy. Here's the more in-depth plot synopsis from our good website friend Wikipedia. So, Thailand's leading health official declares that the country is free of the SARS virus, and that Thailand's superior technology and medical research will prevent the disease from occurring in the kingdom. However, far away in Africa, there's been an outbreak of a mutant type 4 strain of the SARS virus, which causes sufferers to turn into bloodthirsty zombies when they die. Now, a hornet carrying the virus from Africa is hit by an airliner. I'm not joking, this is a official plot synopsis here. And it lands in Thailand, of course. And it somehow survives, flies into the open window of a Volvo, and stings a man on the back of his neck. The man becomes patient zero in the outbreak of SARS 4. He then returns to his apartment building and infects others. Among the zombified creatures is the giant Burmese python named Albert. Yes, actually the plot synopsis is funnier than the actual film. The plot summary here is definitely more funny than the film, I think. But let's get to some positives first here. Let's begin with a positive note. There are plenty of zombies here, and the story never takes itself seriously, so it doesn't get bogged down. Sometimes, a film with a lot of humor kind of puts the humor on hold for a while at times, and you have like this dull section that really there's no comedy in it. It tries to get serious and add dramatic weight. This film doesn't even bother with that, and I think that's a positive, because if this film tried it, it would have been even worse than it currently is. Pacing is also very fast here. The pacing's pretty good, and there are a handful of semi-amusing moments. However, this movie proves that effective comedy is the product of effort and craftsmanship just as much as any other aspect of cinema, and it's certainly clear that very little effort was put into making a script that's actually funny. Any random person could have written this humor if they were in a silly mood. I mean, I could think of, if I was in college with my buddies, just give us a few hours and we could come up with a script that's basically equivalent to this. And that's not really saying too much. That's a big problem, too, because this film relies so much on being funny. That means that it fails a lot in what it's trying to do here. There's a lot of jokes in this and a lot of humor. The sound effects are also a bit of a detriment at times because the comedic effectiveness of some scenes would have been better with more subtle treatment instead of some of the loud boing and toot noises that are used. It's almost like a cartoon at times with its sound design. And that makes everything, well, not everything, but it makes some scenes feel very forced and the humor come off as ineffective. CGI is subpar and unnecessarily used at times, I think. For example, there's a scene with a zombie fetus that would have been far more effective and funny if they used a physical effect. If they just got a little baby doll or a little baby, threw some fake blood on it and used that instead. I think it would have worked better. Because the CGI baby, you're just like, ugh, it's not funny and it's not effective in terms of horror. Well, most of the action and horror scenes were also fairly lame, I think. There's no good structure to how the zombies attack or the human counterattack, so to speak. There is some creative stuff, though. At times there is. There's some stuff here that's wacky that I found to be somewhat interesting and entertaining. But I think, again, not a whole lot of thought placed into it. It might have been better if they were a little bit more, they had a little bit more craftsmanship to it, So this one, unfortunately, did not work for me. It does have its fans, though. There are a good number of fans of Sars Wars, which is one reason why I blind bought the DVD years ago. So if you enjoyed some of the other Asian zombie films that I disliked in prior videos, check this one out. You might like it. If you haven't noticed yet, a lot of the Asian zombie films that we have covered so far, I have not liked very much. There's been some exceptions, but a lot of them, I just don't like very much. I think I approve of some of the Asian zombie films from previous years. In fact, there's one that I think is freaking phenomenal that we'll get to later on. But yeah, this is another one that just rubbed me the wrong way. So let's move on here. But we continue to visit Thailand for our next 3 films. So Thailand's getting a little bit of focus here. Can any of these films transition us into the good films, or are all 3 of them going to be a little underwhelming? Huh? Let's take a look here. The next one is a film that people don't talk about very much, and that is The Sisters, another Thai horror film. Now in this film, a group of teen musicians check into a hotel after a night of performance outside of Bangkok, not knowing that the room they are staying in harbors a deadly secret. They must set out to solve the mystery behind a prostitute's murder in that very room to save their lives. Incorporating identical ideas from many Japanese horror films, this movie offers virtually nothing original or creative. The death scenes were wholly unsatisfying, and the plot was generally uninteresting. On the positive side, the cinematography and the mood were nicely done, I think, with some nice splashes of color, actually. It's always nice to see some splashes of color in horror films, because there's a lot of, especially in America, I think, a lot of mainstream horror films have this very kind of muted, downplayed color scheme, a lot of grays and like bland blues that are used. But this one has some splashes of color, which is good. But unfortunately, that positive does not significantly improve an otherwise average and run-of-the-mill film. There's really not much more to say about this one because I don't remember much of it. So I would suggest that you ignore this one. There's plenty of other Thai horror films to check out, some of which we've already covered and many of which we are going to cover. Now the next film here is far more popular than The Sisters, and it's also from Thailand, but is it better than The Sisters or not? That's the question. And that is Art of the Devil. Now this one tells the story of a young Thai girl who meets a married man at a country club. Now the two soon begin an affair, and the girl finds herself pregnant, which frequently happens. When she breaks the news to this man, he appears to settle by giving her a sum of money in exchange for her silence, reassuring her that he will not leave her. However, he later wakes her up in the middle of the night, informing her that for that large sum of money, he had the right to share her with other men. What a scumbag. Now bad stuff happens and black magic is invoked, causing many deaths to those associated with these characters. So this is a horror flick with a subpar script and editing. I didn't find either one of those to be particularly impressive here. Most of the deaths are mediocre. They're nothing really to write home about. The ending isn't particularly exciting or thrilling, and every other aspect of the movie is unremarkable, with the exception of a barbecued fetus and one shockingly gorgeous lead protagonist for the guys out there. But you have to remember, before watching this, I had already seen my fair share of Hong Kong sorcery flicks from the 1980s, and I can assure you that Art of the Devil is hopelessly outmatched, because the spellcasting itself here is not particularly memorable, especially when you compare it to some of those insane spellcasting films that we covered in the 1980s. And if you're new to this channel and you have not seen my Asian horror reviews from the 80s, I definitely recommend you check those out, and check some of those movies out if you're interested in spellcasting and wizardry and horror. Because some of those films, even the ones that aren't that great, usually have a few memorable moments. The Art of the Devil really doesn't contribute. It's, Art of the Devil, I must say that it had a little bit going for it. I kind of like the lead actress. There was a lot of mediocre stuff too, though. It's not a bad movie, I don't think. There's not a lot of stuff that's terrible in it, but it just rides that line of mediocrity for the most part. It's just lacking in the one thing that the entire premise is based on, and that's memorable witchcraft. Fortunately, though, both sequels to this franchise are better than this one, and we will review those later in this playlist, so look out for those. I really think that if you want to get into this Art of the Devil series, and I'm going to explain why when I cover the other films, but I definitely recommend that you start with Part 2 and 3, and then go back to Part 1, because you can watch them really in any order. If I remember correctly, Part 3 is actually a prequel to 2. I'll cover that in a later video. I'm pretty sure that's the case. So you can watch 2 and 3 as almost like one big film. And then if you like those, go back to 1, which is it's much less memorable, let's put it that way. And then our next Thai film here is another one that, kind of like The Sisters, is not mentioned very often, and that is 6. Now, this movie is about a girl who is mysteriously connected to the number 6, which is related to her bad luck. On the night before her 24th birthday, 2 plus 4 equals 6, if you didn't recognize that, her friends come to celebrate with her. One of her friends, who has a knowledge of horoscope, this will not end well, finds the snake star in the sky, which rarely appears in rainy season. So it's a sign of bad luck that will claim her life possibly in the near future. But this girl, our protagonist, believes that it's complete nonsense and wants to prove the truth. So, of course, all 6 of these friends head to a desolate mansion. Where else? That allegedly has 6 coffins within it. Then they come face to face with supernatural events. Now, the acting here, I think, is pretty good. As the same actress who was in Nang Nok from 1999 and The Unborn from 2003. So if you enjoyed both of those films, I enjoyed Nang Nok. The Unborn I thought was kind of dodgy. If you enjoyed both of those, though, and you like the lead actress, there might be one reason for you to check 6 out, because she's in this. And the location does have some booty atmosphere to it, so this one has a few more positives to it than some of the previous films we covered tonight. Unfortunately, though, the movie is very slow-moving, and it's unfocused, as it fails to generate anything worthwhile from its themes of astrology, spirit-calling rituals, etc. Just, you think you could get really creative with that stuff. You could throw in a lot of astrology type of references, or do a lot of spirit-calling rituals, etc., but it kind of limits those things, unfortunately. It also tosses in a twist near the end that does not work very well. Ultimately, this just isn't very good, and I don't think I could recommend it, unfortunately. But, finally, we have made that transition now, in my opinion, to some movies that prove to be a bit more interesting for me personally. And I can tell you right now that you will not agree with me on some of these. And I know, some of you who are fans of Asian horror have seen some of these, and you are not going to like some of the things I have to say. I'm going to speak more positively about these films, but some of these have notorious reputations of being awful. But that's what makes these movie discussions so interesting. One person's garbage is another one's treasure. And a lot of people think this next film is total garbage. In fact, Roger Swan listed this film as the absolute worst Japanese film he has ever seen. And that is, of course, Kirei, The Terror of Beauty, a Japanese horror thriller. A cosmetic surgeon performs numerous procedures on a psychologically unstable woman, leading to unwelcome consequences when this woman keeps coming back for more extreme procedures before her previous surgeries have even properly healed. So this woman's really, really out there. There's something mentally wrong with her. Now, during our exploration of Asian horror thus far, Japan has churned out their fair share of super low-budget horror films. And I think this is a moderately entertaining one, due to its quality script and good acting performances. Yes, I actually do believe that that's the case. I know a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but I've seen far worse script writing and performances from what is displayed in this film. The characters are also found to be fairly interesting, with a creepy, menacing antagonist and a protagonist who's also a bit edgy herself. There are a few intense moments involving surgery-themed horror, so, that's a positive if you're into that kind of thing, if you're into kind of plastic surgery-style horror. In terms of negative qualities, and there are some here, trust me, the production values are very low, while the ending is absurd and fairly dim-witted, unfortunately. That's my biggest gripe with this film, is the ending. So if you greatly value horror films that really stick their endings, you may not like this one for that reason alone, because it doesn't really end off too well. And of course, there are far better films that deal with similar themes. For example, Kim Ki-duk's phenomenal film Time from 2006, which is a drama-romance hybrid, which I'm sure I'll review and it's a separate video on my YouTube channel at some point. That's a really good one. But I do think that Kirei, The Terror of Beauty, is a watchable film. It's got its flaws that a lot of people bring up, but I really think there's something about it that's just kind of held my interest enough to make it enjoyable. And I actually watched this for a second time fairly recently, so I'm pretty assured in my opinion on this one. But remember, and I always try to warn you about this, I'm in the minority in this one, okay? So if you decide to watch it, go in with low expectations. So if you don't like it, don't yell at me. All right. And DVD availability of this one is that it is moderately available. I think I saw a few copies on eBay. I don't think Netflix has it anymore. They might for rent. And Amazon might have a few copies floating around. This is one that seems to be going out of print, I think. But you can still find some DVDs out there. All right, the next one is another interesting film. Definitely an interesting one. And that is Lizard Baby, a Japanese horror comedy hybrid. Now check this one out. A horror screenwriter named Umeki has writer's block. But after going with his pregnant wife to a checkup, he gets an idea. Hey, how about a horror story about a woman giving birth to a reptile? That's a great idea for, a screenplay. Now, his wife is disgusted with the idea, but he develops the screenplay, which the critics are very pleased with. Unfortunately, life imitates art, as his wife gives birth to a half-human, half-lizard son. This man's mind then slowly slips into a downward spiral as his wife nurtures the lizard child. Yeah, this one's a little nutty. This one's on the nutty side, but it's a bit different, and, you like that. The Lizard Baby itself is hilarious and very cheesy, which is fun to watch in my opinion. It really is. But there is also a very clever plot device that's actually used that kind of justifies the poor special effects of the Lizard Baby, which I thought was really cool. Storyline is layered to create a blend of real and unreal events. It kind of shifts there. And the 50-minute runtime flies right by, I think. In the world of inspired creative horror, sometimes charming cheesiness can be more effective than lame attempts at coolness, and Lizard Baby is a good example of that, I think. One of 6 films in the Hideshi Hino theater of horror. And we will cover, of course, the final 4 of those films later on. So, hey, Lizard Baby, you know what? I do recommend it, but be ready for some cheesiness. And the availability of Lizard Lady is that it is moderately available again, kind of like Kirei, the Terror of Beauty. You can find it on eBay, maybe a little bit on Amazon. However, this Hideshi Hino, these films are in a box set floating around out there. There's a box set with all of these films. But check out, you know what, I would say before you go out and buy the box set, wait until I review the final films in the series before making that investment. Because you're probably going to want to know, you know, based on, I guess, my descriptions of these and what they're like, you're going to want to know, have some information. You want to be informed before you buy that box set, because it's definitely an offbeat, odd series of films. If you think that you're interested in most of them, take the dive, make the purchase. If most of them just seem stupid to you and you have no interest, then don't even bother. But, you know, of these 6 films, I did enjoy some of them. Next here. Oh boy, so now we're getting into some, a lot of different types of stuff here. You know, we've covered some odd stuff. Kirei, the Terror of Beauty, which is a surgery-type horror film. You got Lizard Baby, and now we have Concrete, also known as Schoolgirl in Cement, again from Japan. Now, this film is based on the true story of a 16-year-old high school girl who was abducted, tortured, raped, and murdered during 44 days of captivity. If this sounds familiar, it should, because we previously covered 2 other films that were based on the same event. Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case from 1995 and Juvenile Crime from 1997. The first film was good, second film not so good. So how does Concrete stack up? Well, it's somewhere in the middle of these 2, I think. The opening 30 minutes of this film focuses quite a bit on the antagonist's life, specifically his descent and dealings with gangsters, which is an important theme and element in the real-life story here, before he abducts the girl, which is a slightly different storytelling tactic and from the previous films that were based on this event, and I do think that it works pretty well here. The final hours, when things get depraved and violent, which is a necessary element when telling the story, I really think. I do not think that this was as emotionally compelling as Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case, primarily because that film was unusually effective in that regard. It really provoked an emotionally sad response from the viewer. So Concrete does not reach that level of emotional impact, but I do think that it is sufficiently nasty and realistic. And it's certainly better than Juvenile Crime. So, you know, I do recommend Concrete. But I would recommend, if you can get your hands on Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case, which is actually just as difficult to find as Concrete. But if you could find that one on YouTube, or if it pops up somewhere, watch that one first, because I think that's the best of these films. And as you can tell, Concrete availability is not very good. It's difficult to find. I watched it on YouTube at one point. Not sure if it's still up or not. And these films, sometimes the titles for these films will get confusing. You know, somebody will post it on YouTube, and maybe it'll be Concrete, but it'll be listed as one of the other films, because, you know, a lot of people just get them mixed up. So, just, you'll have to do a little work to watch it and make sure you watch the right film. Next here, we move back to South Korea. And that is Face. Of course, 2004 we're still at. The main character here is a man who works on reconstructing faces from skull data. He quits his work in an institute to stay with his daughter, who is awaiting a heart transplant. Now, a newcomer researcher who recently arrived at the institute comes to his house with the skull of a murder victim that had her whole body melted down with acid by the murderer. So he initially refuses the assignment because he left the institute, but is soon haunted by the ghost of the victim. So he decides to reconstruct the face of the woman in the hopes that the case can be solved and his hauntings will subside. So I like the interactions and the chemistry between the 2 leads in this film. That's really the biggest strength here. Both actors give very good performances, I think, and they work well together. They have good chemistry. The horror elements are nothing exceptional, but the hauntings are a bit weirder than usual. You would expect kind of a generic ghost girl type presence, but they're a bit weirder than that. At least in terms of the visuals that are used to show the ghost itself. It's kind of hard to describe, so I'll let you discover that for yourself if you haven't seen the movie. The story is also rather engaging, and the facial reconstruction angle provides something a bit different here. You know, it's a little bit of it has its own little flair to it. I also like some of the plot turns down the stretch, which were very interesting. So I recommend Face. On the surface, it seems kind of a generic movie. It kind of is a little bit, but it also has its own little nuances that makes it an entertaining viewing. Now, what's the availability of this one? It is moderately available on DVD, so you can find it used. You might be able to find some used copies out there still. The next film is, again, we're going back to another very different type of horror film here. You don't see ones like this very often at all. And that is Late Bloomer, a Japanese horror drama hybrid. Now this film is about a mentally and physically handicapped man who grows severely frustrated with his own existence. He's disabled with cerebral palsy, but all he wants is to hang out with his friends and enjoy beer, rock and roll, and women. He's a pretty cool guy. Unfortunately, his frustrations are exacerbated by the presence of his cute new caretaker, who he falls for romantically. But when his best friend attempts to steal his secret love, he embarks upon a cold-blooded rampage of revenge. Yes, the man with cerebral palsy is the inflictor of violence in this movie, which makes this interesting premise right off the bat. And I think the execution is good here. The actor in this film is actually handicapped in real life, so that gives it some serious authenticity. As a viewer, I felt his frustrations because they were portrayed very they were portrayed very well, basically, and you practically begin to root for him when he's engaging in his acts of violence. This is a low-budget, gritty film that is also quite unorthodox and very interesting, I think. Definitely worth a look if you're looking for something different. There has been a handful of films, Asian films, that focus on either mentally or physically handicapped people. I know there was one romance film from South Korea called Oasis that was really good. It received a lot of acclaim. Not a horror film, but it's a good one. They actually have a number of these films that are focused on handicapped people, and maybe I'll cover some of those in my other videos in this playlist, because there's some good ones. But we're at our final film tonight, and that final film is one that is fairly well known. Gets mixed reviews, of course, and that is Cursed from Japan. Employees and customers at a mini-mart encounter strange phenomena. Bad things especially happen when someone cashes out an order with a total of 666, 999, or 444. This movie shifts focus between a number of characters, many of which are customers, but the main character is a young girl who works the register during the day shift. The opening half has two good horror sequences, I think. The little girl with the ball and the dude with the sledgehammer. There's a nice variety of scare tactics, too. It doesn't do the same thing over and over again, which makes things somewhat unpredictable, I think. There are practically no jump scares at all here, which is a major plus for me personally. In fact, one odd thing that I noticed after a second viewing that I did fairly recently is that the horror scenes themselves actually last very long and take their time to develop. I find this to be a very nice positive characteristic that is not something that most online reviewers of this film have pointed out. But I think it makes the film somewhat memorable, actually. Because the horror scenes, it just seems like they take a while from start to finish. And you could see things building, you know what I mean? The premise of a cursed location is very generic, of course. But the ultimate explanation, which involves tombstones, is a bit different. It has an odd, bizarre feel to it, too, this film, that's more spooky than scary. And it is fairly slow-paced, but I think it's worth a watch. I enjoy this one. The online reviews of this one are kind of all over the place. Some people hate it, some people like it, and I think, you know, there's some people that really love this film too. So this one's all over. Anytime you see a film where just the reception is just scattered all over, that kind of makes it interesting to watch. So, what's the availability of this one here? Availability of Cursed is that it is, just like Face and Late Bloomer, it's moderately available. They're all moderately available. These were films that were highly available probably 5 years ago, but some of the DVDs are going out of print, but there's still enough used copies around there if you want to add it to your collection. Alright, so we've successfully completed part 2 of our journey into Asian horror from 2004. Now, so far we've covered a handful of generic haunting films like The Commitment from Video 1, Bunshinsaba, and Spirit of the Glass. But we've also covered a doll movie, an alternate dimension movie, a few simple yet weird location films, a silly zombie comedy, a witchcraft movie, excuse me, a cosmetic surgery movie, a movie about a lizard baby, a torture flick based on a real-life event, and a film about a murderer with cerebral palsy. So things are getting a bit crazy here, and that's good. So be sure to join me for part 3 on this journey into 2004, our first part 3 of this playlist, where we will again cover some odd stuff, as well as a handful of haunting films. And in theory, these films should be getting better and better. At least in my opinion, we're covering better and better films with each video. Although there are going to be a few more controversial choices in the next one. And, you know, we've covered a few generic haunting flicks that were not so good so far, but we've got some good ones coming up. So if you like the supernatural haunting films from these countries, you're in for a treat. And as always, we'll see you next time.